the Indian Ocean, just off the coast of northwest Australia. "8,000 years ago, these tropical waters rose, and the coast of the mainland became a string of islands. One island has become a life raft for species that no longer exist anywhere else in the world: Barrow. "15 rare and endangered marsupials survive on the island. Their only predator, the parenti, a 2-metre-long lizard. On Barrow, there are no introduced species. Here, only 56 kilometres from mainland Australia, isolation has offered survival. There's a thriving population of golden bandicoots. These burrowing bettongs, tiny rat kangaroos, once ranged freely right across Australia. Like this spectacled hare wallaby, they're close to extinct. For the last 35 years, they've had a new force to reckon with. Barrow Island is on top of an oil field. 150 oilmen live and work on the island in shifts. 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Beam pumps work round the clock, draining the underground reservoirs of oil. But even though Barrow is Australia's second biggest oil field, the wildlife and the oil business live in relative, if unexpected, harmony. McClements is one of the island's grader drivers.
I'd probably be the biggest destroyer of vegetation on the island. And it used to hurt me to clear acres of vegetation, put a new road in or to do seismic lines. But later on I'd restore those areas and the animals would come back to them. Working on the grader, it's like a grandstand view of the whole island. You're always thinking, and you treat the island as if it's your own backyard, and it's not hard to do. You have to be a caring person really to operate any sort of earthworks machine on the island. So many animals here, it's just unbelievable. Still all here.
That they're here at all is largely down to naturalist Harry Butler, who'd been working on Barrow long before oil was an issue. He became a consultant to the oil company, and by trial and error, he developed the policies which allow oil wells and animals to coexist.
You're always frightened that something might have happened. You're always anticipating the worst and hoping for the best, and it's like falling in love all over again.
Even though he retired 5 years ago, Harry just keeps coming back.
Just like that. It's a big sigh, I'm back, it's wonderful. I didn't think I'd come back, but there it is. And it's a marvellous feeling. It's a very special piece of real estate to me. And it's such a wonderful place, let's face it. I mean, I would be hard-pressed to be this joyous about some scruffy bit of bush down south.
Harry made a successful television series about the bush, some of it filmed on Barrow.
The very first camp I came to was a camp of 10, 12 people. We lived on kangaroo meat and fish and crayfish and oysters and things like that. So it was very, very different to what it is today.
Barrow's fate has been determined by a combination of chance, luck, and the right people at the right time.
That's better.
Barrow Island lies above Northwest Cape
and below the Montebello Islands. Barrow is 18 miles. The geologists made a preliminary inspection and took what rock samples they could. It was impracticable to construct the landing jetty for supply ships. Consequently, supplies had to be moved by barges from the mainland or from ships. Among the early necessities landed were a bulldozer, used at once to shape work roads, and an drilling rig was brought in through the surf, piece by piece. With the gear and materials, the rig towered above the spot chosen for the first. At the surface, they connect equipment to control any flow of gas or water or, the ultimate of all hopes, oil.
Since 1967, more than 300 million barrels of oil have flowed down this pipeline. Pumped into tankers out at sea, the oil makes a significant contribution to Australia's economy.
We live in a world of compromise. Yeah, I'm prepared to compromise, provided that compromise does not threaten the species here. An environment like this, Barrow Island, which is for wildlife, you can't improve, you can only maintain it. And that's what we've done.
Managing the problem is really a matter of managing the people.
I would have to say the credit goes to the collective 30,000 people who've worked here over the last 35 years. And so people can say, I worked on Barrow Island, and today it is the biggest piece of land with no rats. It's the only piece of land that has a major industry running for 35 years. It's not had a major eco-change, not had a loss of a species, not had an introduction of a species. I mean, there's nowhere else in the world you can see it.
Of course, the wildlife has to compromise too.
Bloody ticks.
Over the years, Harry has become a mentor to Les.
Les McClements is one of the classic examples of Barrow. Because of his job, driving along the roads, he sees a lot of wildlife. You right, Les?
I'm just looking, Harry.
And so Les has become one of the environmental champions, and he's a very good one. He's passionate about Barrow Island. He's gone beyond just doing the job. He's passionate about it.
Les has watched this Brahminy kite chick outlive its weaker sibling. Its parents are nesting for their first season in the island mangroves, and Les has been monitoring their progress. The kites are one of 5 kinds of birds of prey that live year-round on the island. He uses his observations and information from fellow workers to keep Harry up to date on changes in the life of the island's birds and animals.
See, that's an adult animal. That's an adult animal. That's a big animal.
That's a good
That's
size
a breeding
one.
size
Look at
animal.
There you
Oh,
go, yeah.
my God.
Not a bad size one.
That's a green. That's a breeding green. We've seen the turtles, mate. Just let them in peace. These guys have got more care in them than most of the green groups I know. It's like coming home. Oh, g'day, Harry. Oh, look, there's a bird's nest. You should go and have a look at it. Or, oh, look, I saw something. Perhaps you ought to do something about it. And they're all interested. There's no, oh, Christ, there's this bloke again who gives a hard time. Everyone's rapt. Later on, when it starts to dry out, that's when there's going to be animals dropping out through lack of moisture. So that spring becomes critical, and it's the only surface fresh water on the island. Everywhere else they've got to dig for it. Not good, is it?
On a hot day, I'd probably drink it.
You'd have to, mate.
The Barrow Island Euro has had to adapt as the island changed from rainforest to desert. If the one island waterhole dries up, the heron can leave, but the Euro is marooned. Although it's the largest mammal on the island, it, like most island species, is smaller than its mainland cousins, a reflection of the diminished resources on islands in general and a capacity to survive on less. In summer, the Euro survives by turning arid grasses into fibre, which provides both food and moisture. occasional spring water is a bonus. The Euro has to search the rocks for vital trace elements, licking the mineral salts washed onto the cliffs at the western end of the island. Euros can adapt if the rate of change is slow. They've been on the island for 8,000 years, humans for only 35. If the rate of change moves too fast, this population of Euros may not cope.
Sometimes a Euro, which is a large animal, may come in contact with a vehicle. Sometimes they're killed outright, sometimes they may be injured and they need to be put out of their misery. And the quicker the better.
This Euro female didn't make it, but Les was able to save her Joey. More than 1,000 animals are killed each year on the oil field. It works to the advantage of some.
Individual killing of animals, and people are going to hate me for saying this, is not as much a problem as the destruction of the habitat resources that the animals can persist in.
Harry takes all new workers through a course about the island.
The real conservationists are the people who use the processes of nature, use the resources, and maintain them at the same time. And that's exactly what you're doing while you're working in these fields.
If workers flout the environmental standards, they could lose their jobs. But once they understand the problems, some of them come up with solutions. These beam pumps stop and start all the time. Euros seeking shade beneath them were sometimes crushed when the motor started up. Luke Ulstrup, the island's second grader driver, managed to find an answer.
We've always thought we could put some sort of mat down with spikes on it that would stop the animals sitting underneath the arm. And it seems to be working because the animals don't like laying on these things. We've seen a few perennies laying on them, but they'll lay on anything. They'll climb up spinifex. Yeah, you do cop a bit of stick. We're called greenies, mung beans. It's just a big joke for them to see us run around looking after animals and things. But as soon as they've got an animal that's sore or sick, they're the first to come running to you and say, oh, look, can you look after this, or can you do something with this animal?
Luke and Les are now the island's experts on injured wildlife.
It's all right. I suppose word's just got around now, and if there is an injured animal, then they'll call me up on the radio and I'll go there straight away. You're a young one, aren't you? It's all right. Let's just sit down here. Let's just sit down here. I went out there and it turned out to be an osprey that looked like he'd come in contact with one of the power lines. Yeah, the wrist. That's what I put it down to. He wouldn't have got zapped because he would have been burnt, and plus it probably would have killed him outright. Yeah, you're just a young fella, aren't you? But you're not making a noise. Why? The rule is on the island that you come across any injured animal, you're to put it out of its misery so the animal doesn't suffer. For a while, you just stay there for a while. Whoop, and check you out. Come on. Whoops.
It's the processes that matter, not the species. If you can save the habitat, the species can save themselves. But if you try and save the species without the habitat, finish. If you save the dicky bird, something else is going to suffer. Like, if you walk along the road and you see a little fluttering bird covered in ants, you think, good heavens, I'll save that. So you pick the ants off and you squash them and get rid of them, da-da-da. It's a wonderful feeling. But you've saved one bird, which is going to die anyway, because the moment you release it again, something is going to eat it.
Well, I suppose over all the years Harry's been to the island, that's the way it's been. But then along came me. Since I've been on Barrow Island, I've had a lot of success with animals, a hell of a lot.
But if this osprey is to survive once more in the wild, it'll need all its strength. The only bird of prey to submerge completely on the dive, the osprey uses powerful forward thrusts of the wings to lift itself out of the water. It must then head off quickly, despite the weight of the wriggling fish, to avoid other birds stealing the catch. And to feed its young, the parent bird has to make this journey up to 7 times a day.
Ospreys are pretty hard. It's like as if they've got an ego sort of thing, you know. They want to get the fish themselves rather than be hand-fed or fed by some two-legged, ugly-looking person, you know, with a bloody bushy beard. You know, they'd rather fend for himself. They'd rather get the food themselves. See, stay there. It's all right. Only trying to help you, mate. Only trying to help you, yeah. Oh, there.
Even though they do 12-hour shifts, life for the island workers does have its lighter moments. Some of them decide to try a little hunting of their own. If you want to catch a fish around here, you're better off with wings. While the local wildlife is beautifully adapted to the island's conditions,
On your marks. Get set.
the same can't really be said of the men.
Oh, well, I was running late as usual. Always running late. Running that late, I didn't have time to put my shorts on.
No less.
Everyone was ready when I pulled up in the grader. I only just had enough time to get my sneakers on. And so I just ran and just left my overalls on. Later on, halfway there, I thought to myself, I wish I had a pair of shorts on.
Want to take that for us? Thanks, mate. It might smell a bit.
Could have been worse, but I could have had my boots on as well, and my hard hat.
47-year-old who's never run before. What do I do for him?
Other island workers have a different approach to relaxation. While day might be done for some, for the island's nocturnal population, it's just beginning.
I suppose the bandicoots would have to be my favourite, because they're so inquisitive, they're into everything, they're always sticky beaking here and there, but they're survivors at the same time. I reckon they're the bull terrier of all the animals on the island. They're pretty tough, they are.
The burrowing bettongs aren't quite so robust. They're the only kangaroo which builds and lives in burrows, an adaptation to an environment where the ground cover is sparse and the climate is hot. Once prevalent right across Australia, they were wiped out on the mainland by a combination of feral animals, massive land clearing, and overwhelming competition from rabbits. The Bettongs didn't stand a chance. Now they only survive on islands, most of them here on Barrow.
I love islands, and Australia's blessed in that it's got so many different islands. I think Western Australia's got some 600, and the rest of Australia's got another at least 600 or so. But then Australia's an island too, so where do we go? Where do we stop?
Harry's enthusiasm for islands has been passed on to workers like Luke.
He started off this place, and I believe that he sees this place as one of his own special projects. The quarantine side of things, he started all that up. So if it wasn't for that, certainly you wouldn't have it the way it is today. He'll never leave this place until the day he's 6 foot under, that's for sure. I mean, he'll always have an input on this place.
For Luke's mate, Les, work starts before dawn.
Les has got a really big heart and he just loves looking after the animals. He's learned a lot off Harry, and I've got bits and pieces off Les and the different environmentalists who've come up here. So I think for Les, that he'd love to be able to be full-time environmentalist.
At 10:30, Les needs to be back at base.
You're a little bit quiet in there, I can't hear you. It's time for a feed. Where are you? Oh, there you are, look.
The Joey Les rescued when its mother was hit by a car is thriving.
Whoops. Come on, that's it. I like to keep them in my room because I can hear what they're doing, which is a good way of diagnosing them because you can hear, you know, if they're restless, or you can hear how lively they're getting. So you start giving them a little bit more food. Another 10 mil will do you. When they're keeping me up all night, that's when I let them go the next day because I've had enough of them. I'm sick of them. You're doing well, little fella. What's the time? Oh, you got a little bit to wait yet. You're going to go on that aeroplane, mate, because otherwise you'd be Prentice Tucker. I see one out there now licking its chops. Yep, he'd have you in a flash. He would. Like it in there, do you? Quite happy there.
But if the Joey is released now, it's at risk of being taken by a parenti.
You don't want to come out of there, do you? Here we go. It's the parents that teach them to get away from a parenti, see? So back in there. The best way is to send it off the island and never to return. Get clean there. Look, what's that there? Look here. A little bit there. I'll come and visit you down at Rockingham. How's that sound? Because you're going to survive, you are. Okay, let's go.
Les's mate, Nifty, is going off shift. He'll take the Joey to a wildlife shelter on the mainland.
Here you go, Nifty.
There you go, thanks, Les. We'll take good care of him.
Good on you, mate. His next feed is due at 2 o'clock. So if you want to let Lynn know, 2 o'clock.
And how much did he have at his last feed?
He had 30 mil.
30 mils, and
30
he's due
mil
at 2.
Due at 2 o'clock.
Yeah, okay, I'll pass it on.
And if he gets too hot in there, I don't know, you might just
Oh,
want
it should be right,
Yeah,
mate.
it'll be all right.
Yeah, it should be right.
Okay, all the best, Nifty.
I'll give you a yell.
Good on you, mate.
No worries, brother.
Thanks, buddy. Nifty, he'll look after it. He'll keep it strapped to him so it can feel his heartbeat and keep it warm, and it'll be fine. So it goes to show you, big oil men do care.
Any animals that go off, they are never brought back to the island because the chances of them bringing a disease, which would be totally uncontrollable. So we have this major quarantine program, we always have had, because we control. Everything comes in by aeroplane or by barge, and there's no other way to get to the island.
Only the birds can circumvent the rigidly applied quarantine. The system ensures that intruders are found and destroyed before they ever get on the ships to Barrow.
The neighbouring islands around here haven't been so lucky. Fishermen have gone out and put shacks up, and they've taken cats and dogs and cactuses and weeds and things like that. And this has massively changed the island, even before anybody realised what values it's got.
On Thevenard, 50 kilometres from Barrow, Harry oversees another oil field. Here, industry shares the island with one of Western Australia's most popular fishing resorts. People and boats are constantly coming ashore. And without measures to prevent it, they could bring unwelcome additions to the island.
Mice came into Thevenard about 1964, and no one took very much notice. It wasn't until we got a series of good years of high rainfall, and suddenly we got a mouse eruption. Not a plague, an eruption. There were mice literally everywhere. We put pit traps in the ground, and the things would get 10 gallons of mice in the night. They were just, it's impossible to describe this unless you've seen it.
The introduced European mice overwhelmed the native mice of the island. Although it's bigger, the native mouse moves more slowly and breeds more slowly. It just couldn't compete. Scientist Dorian Morrow came to the island to help.
I started my work looking at the genetics of the island population of native mice to see how different they were.
Protected by the isolation of the island, this mouse was unique. It was a precious population and one that had to be saved.
We wanted to try and find a way to get rid of the house mice selectively without killing the native mouse population. Native mice are much fewer in number. They breed once or twice per year. The house mice can breed a lot quicker. A female can have up to 10 young at a time.
The intruders were poisoned in bait boxes too small for the native mice to get into. Now Morrow's comparing the numbers in capture points set up around the island. Although it was only a trial, he finds native mice restored as the dominant species, for the moment.
If we eradicate house mice, then measures have to be set up to ensure that the quarantine is maintained. A lot of these islands are very isolated, and it is up to the individual to just be conscious of what they could be introducing.
While the native mouse of Thevenard is threatened by an introduced species, offshore there are other hazards.
An oil spill is something that can be dealt with by natural processes. Even though it looks ugly, even though it coats boats and makes swimmers go black, that's a minor social impact. It's very hateful, but it's a social impact. About 5% of all of the oil in the sea around us comes from natural seeps. The natural processes of decay, heat, ultraviolet and bacteria go to work and change it into available food.
A small oil spill may not destroy, but they're better off avoided. Around these offshore rigs, oysters are used to assess water quality. Each day, an oyster can filter 300 litres of water. Elements, including the hydrocarbons which comprise oil, are taken up. Like the canaries of the sea, these oysters will be the first to register impurities.
That's correct, yep.
The oyster meat is removed and sent back to Perth for analysis. If the hydrocarbon levels are too high, they investigate. They could have an oil leak to deal with. This time, the waters get the all clear. Today, the risks are managed, but such care was not always taken. 16 kilometres north of Barrow lies another archipelago, once home to, apparently unvalued, animals and plants.
To the scientists of the 50s, they were a perfect test site, the Montebello Islands. They were like continents in miniature, complete with bays and plains, plateaus and peaks, but devoid of significant flora and fauna. Australia gave permission to Britain to detonate a nuclear device in Australian waters. Britain's first bomb was rigged in an old frigate, HMS Plym, in the midst of a discarded fleet. By association, Australia entered the atomic age with the countdown. HMS Plym evaporated, and radioactive mud and seawater rose 10,000 feet into the air with the familiar plume.
Today, we understand that these islands were not empty wastelands, although they may be now. On Barrow, only 10 years later, industry arrived. Now 1,000 kilometres of pipeline carries toxic crude across the landscape.
You don't want to spill anywhere, but as long as it's contained, it's not a real big impact to the environment. It's an impact when it starts getting into the vegetation and that around the spinifex.
Every worker has a responsibility to protect the island from spills, stopping leaks before they do any damage. Even a small spill like this can coat animals and plants in crude oil. Encouraging the workers to protect the island is at the core of Harry's work. Information is the key to his strategy on the island.
I really believe that anything that gives people an added dimension to understanding the world in which they live is a plus.
You might notice as you come down there's a very red soil in there too.
These magnificent fossil beds of Australian ancestral marsupials, things like giant wombats, giant kangaroos, thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger and things of that nature. So we've got this whole marvellous story of the prehistory of the ocean that formed the oil beds that form Barrow Island.
Harry's early fossil finds encouraged other experts to come to the island. Ken Aplin and his colleagues have been working in this island laboratory for years.
The landscape of 5 or 6 million years ago really would have looked very different to today. Most of it was covered by a very rich red soil, and that soil would have supported lush forest which was inhabited by ringtails and cuscusses and a whole variety of kangaroos that couldn't possibly be supported by the vegetation that we see here today.
But as the island dried and the soil eroded, only those able to cope with the new conditions survived. For the elusive rock wallaby, which doesn't need to drink at all, the exposed rock faces of Barrow are a perfect habitat.
Each time the sea level has risen back up to form the island, mangroves have spread down the coast, probably from the north, and that would have been a very rich environment for Aboriginal people. As the sea rose that little bit more, it looks as though Aboriginal people left the islands completely.
As the land bridge between Barrow and the mainland submerged, only the animals remained. Ken Aplin is finding their fossils in this rich deposit, including species which didn't survive the changing climate.
I really expect just about every species that we'll get from this deposit will be new. Some of them might be related to modern species, and other ones probably represent extinct branches, experiments that have died out completely and don't leave any modern descendants.
As the day wears on, the finds become more interesting still.
We just came down here to check the old cave structure that we'd never looked at before, and blow me down, but there's another great fossil deposit. You don't ever see fossil deposits richer than this. There must have been an owl sitting immediately above this point, and the owls swallow their prey and then throw up the bones and the hair in a form of a large pellet. It's packed full of all different kinds of rodents, bandicoots. I just saw the jaw of a wallaby coming out of the side of this piece. Some of the material was very complete.
And so they keep digging, using fragments of fossilised bone to flesh out a history of the island and its inhabitants. A history that goes back to the time when it wasn't an island at all. Back in the present, this betong is tempted, but too shy to join the fun.
How hungry are we?
Unlike this young male brush-tailed possum, who's one of the first to arrive.
Good job I didn't take a bite of it.
Oh, chicken looks good.
The bandicoot, an omnivorous creature at any time, is happy to forage along with the possum. On Barrow, fighting between species is rare.
There's heaps of possums all.
While female possums stay with their mothers, males must find new territory and sources of food. Theoretically, feeding wildlife on the island is banned. So it's good that Harry's out, introducing his students to nocturnal animals elsewhere.
Macropod is Bigfoot. See why it's called the black flanked rock wallaby? I've never seen one like that. His ears are chopped about. That's what happens with the roos. They fight by biting their ears. He's able to pick up the heat of a mouse, and he's able to shift his head around so the heat is coming evenly from both sides. Once it's in line, he strikes. He can't see it, but he can strike. Now, this is a full-size pygmy python. On each vertebrae, there is a pair of ribs. Got him? The reason I'm hanging onto his head is not because I'm frightened of him. I just don't want him hurting his mouth, because if they break their teeth, they get canker. I have visitors come here, and they're constantly amazed that the animals are so tame. And I have to tell them, I'd love to say they're tame. They're not tame. They're just unafraid. Because they have no natural predators, they are used to the fact nothing can hurt them. And that we're here, they see no reason to change it.
It's unusual to find different marsupial species living in such close quarters. But codes exist, and individuals must make room for the quirks of others. Most of all, they must respect another species' turf, unless they're young and on a steep learning curve. This possum has followed a betong into their territory. With so few trees on the island, possum nests are in short supply. The betongs in this huge cave system should be sensitive to invasion. It's the last place on Earth where they survive in healthy numbers. Relatively undisturbed, with the exception of an occasional confused stranger. The limestone caves and the labyrinth of burrows offer a cool refuge from the heat and much-needed humidity for the animals' moisture exchange. The young stay in the burrows until weaned, protected from predators by the elaborate system of entrances and exits. The cave is a haven for these stocky, pugnacious betongs, and a wrestling pit where the males fight for dominance. The loser ends the tussle by kicking out with its big kangaroo-like hind legs, conceding to a stronger opponent. Only as day approaches does the warring subside and feeding take precedence. The osprey is almost ready for release.
He looks like he's in really good nick.
Yeah, well, he's a lot better than he was. You can lift both wings right up like this, and I've felt all along the wing, but we won't stress him out now, but tonight we'll come down there and we'll both go over it.
It's not fully recovered, but growing impatient with captivity. Les is also busy keeping up with Harry. They've come to check the Betong's cave for signs of disturbance.
There's a whole little story here about what happened last night. See these tracks, fresh tracks coming down now through there? And this is all the new burrows that have just begun. These have only happened in the last 3 years.
It is a pretty unique place. God knows how long they've been breeding in there for. They've got new warrens they've made in there.
Live down there.
Those are one of the best places on the island for me, just because it's like a haven in there for a little happy haven.
Prints, but not very many. There's a story around that some of the people come here to play instruments because of the good acoustics, and I can understand that. We don't need people to play instruments in places like this.
But preserving the cave is clearly the key to preserving the Betongs. And it's also the key to preserving another population that was previously not known to exist. It used to be island practice to dump waste sludge in some of these underground caves. The practice stopped when they learned that the caves contained a wealth of ancient species.
Nobody in their right mind can say we don't make mistakes. But I will say that when we make a mistake, we learn from it. We don't repeat mistakes.
West Australian museum scientist Bill Humphreys and his team of divers are returning to the cave. They're on the hunt for troglobites, living creatures from a time when this semi-arid area was lush rainforest. Tiny, eyeless, long-limbed and without pigment, these creatures can only live in the dark clefts of the caves, waiting for the next flush of rainwater in order to survive.
Go on for you.
On each trip, Bill and his team have found new forms of life, many of them older than the fossilised animals of the island.
Yeah, I think I'd make a good osprey. I was surprised myself, actually. When I built the nest, I was thinking to myself, you don't know what you're doing here, and by the time I finished the nest, I thought to myself, geez, it looks real. Releasing this osprey is difficult because you don't know how it's going to go when it's set back into the wild. It may pair up with another osprey because the ospreys will look after each other.
Later, another oil worker saw a second osprey join the nest. The injured bird's mate had found him. But Les didn't see it. He had some family bonding of his own to do.
Don't want to be late. I'm late for everything else, but I won't be late for this.
For the first time, children can visit their parents on the island. And Les is waiting for his daughter, Chantal.
I've told her all about Barrow Island and the animals, and she just can't wait. She had a bag packed a week ago.
What sort of animals eat other animals then?
Oh, well, just the prenti.
Does he eat other prenties?
Yes, he'll eat other prenties. Very seldom see two prenties together.
Are they fast?
Over a short distance.
But could you catch them easy?
Yeah, you can catch them, but you don't want to catch them.
Do they bite?
They can bite you, yeah.
Have you ever been bitten by one?
No, I don't try to catch them. I just let them go about their business.
Is that one of the things that kill all the animals? Or does it only just eat are the Prenties?
It sort of rules on the island. And I used to always think to myself, geez, I'd love me kids to see this. And it's finally come true.
There's an old saying that I've been living by for years. The first task of life is to live. But in order to live, you have to understand the world in which you live. And the more you understand the world in which you live, the better you live. It's my opinion. In 100 years' time, I would see this being a series of major roads with a major tourist hotel for ecotourism and possibly a second one based up on the north end with glass-bottom boats working the reefs around here. But they'll only be able to use it in the future if the wildlife persists.
I've seen clownfish and I've seen one stingray. And we've seen turtles and lots of coral. Dad didn't tell me if there was any sharks or anything.
Such a good place. I mean, it's a wonderful place. God's country. That's for sure. Harry's country. Nearly as good as God.
People will find a way to stuff up the environment no matter how many laws and cares you put in. They're always going to argue, this is my right, this is my country, this is my right to stuff this country up. There's lack of information as well as lack of control. But if I go out and show them and say, this is the history of Barrow Island, then they take their friends out and show them and tell them the whole story. And that's what I mean by information. And you say, well, cherish that because it's so good, it's such a lovely story. And they say, yeah, we see that, yeah.
A unique bargain with nature has been achieved on Barrow. Proof that where there is goodwill and good sense, people can make a difference. But the island still faces an uncertain future. When the oil runs out and industry leaves, ecotourism could take over. Whatever comes, and whatever the reasons, without proper controls on Barrow, its precious cargo of remnant species could be erased in a careless moment.